All right, so I know that we still have some folks joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get started so we can utilize our full hour here. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All right, there you go. Just a couple of housekeeping things tonight. As I mentioned, we're expecting a number of you on the class tonight. So if you could keep your microphones muted, that would really help all of us. In the top right corner of your screen, you may know this by now, is a box. And if you go to that little box and click on speaker view, it's going to say view in your upper corner, right-hand corner of your screen. If you go to that box and click on speaker view, it will only show those who are speaking. So you just might have a better experience this evening if you go to that rather than seeing a bunch of little boxes. I want to welcome all of you who are joining us this evening. I'm Reverend Annie Epling, and I am the pastor head of staff at First Presbyterian Church of Fort Wayne. More importantly, this evening, I am a proud graduate of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. I graduated in 1996 with a Master of Divinity degree. Some of you know my husband, the Reverend Terry Epling. He is a proud graduate of Louisville Seminary, having graduated a year prior to me in 1995. And if you're in the Fort Wayne area, I can also let you know that Reverend Bill Hayworth is also a Louisville grad. And we support a Louisville student. One of our members is currently in his final year at Louisville, and that is Yayan Park. So he's a good member of First Pres, and we are proud to support him in his theological education endeavors. Why don't I go ahead and open in prayer, and then I'll introduce our main speaker this evening. So let's go ahead and pray. Ever gracious and loving God, we thank you for letting us be together in this virtual format so that we can learn from Dr. Pollard about theological education, about the Black church, and about how we can support students and be a voice for justice and be a church that advocates for others. We ask that your presence be with us this evening. May it move among us, and just let this time be a time of learning and growth, and maybe even a time of challenge as well. We thank you for your Son who gives us life, and it's through him we pray. Amen. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alton Pollard, who is the president of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. I am super excited that he agreed to be with us this evening, and thankful for the wonders of technology that make this happen. So Dr. Pollard, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I would love to know just what led you to Louisville Seminary, and a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are this evening.
Well, thank you, Reverend Epling. Can we do first names tonight? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Hallelujah. All right. So everybody, I'm just plain old Alton, as I like to say. When my parents brought me into this world, they named me Alton, and that's good enough for me. So I appreciate the time to spend with you this evening. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here. Annie, I just want to thank you for extending the invitation and look forward to the conversation with you. So I see familiar names and mostly unfamiliar. And Annie, I want you to know that our board chair is on here. Elizabeth Clay. So, and I see another trustee. I see uh, one of our students, a couple of our students. So um, we're here with you as well.
Thanks.
I received a call in the winter of 2018 um, from the search committee. One of the members, who is also on the board, um, reached out and asked me if I would have any interest in considering Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary as my next vocational home, my next destination. And it floored me when he called. Um, Let me just say, by way of background, I had recently had major surgery. I was convalescing for 3 months at home, and I was quite literally in the bed when the phone rang. I will never forget it. And when he um, sent out his query, it totally caught me by surprise. I had no clue whatsoever. I knew nothing about Louisville Seminary. I knew as much about Louisville Seminary as I knew about Presbyterians. So that pretty much tells you something. I had a lot of education to do, but it was the generosity in his question. It was the invitation, the openness of inquiry that spoke volumes to me, that said, if this theological institution is willing to reach out to someone who does not have a history, does not have familiarity, and um, is willing to possibly take a chance on that individual, that's the kind of place for me. It was very, it was just that simple. I've always sought to listen to the Spirit of the living God moving on the face of the deep of my existence. And boy, if that phone call from out of nowhere wasn't one of those kind of moments, I don't know um, what is. And began the journey companioning with LPTS, Louisville Seminary, from that moment forward, going through the interview process and all the rest, coming to this place, knowing that here was an institutional partner that had values, virtues that were synonymous with my own, that um, wanted to not only be encouraging of a new president, but was also hopeful that a new president would help them to further their own sense of ethical propriety, being engaged not just rhetorically, but being engaged literally in our issues of the day. And that's what brought me here. I had never spent any time extensively in Louisville either. So it was quite, it was quite a new destination. And when we saw my beloved Jessica and I, when we saw the campus for the first time, it was after the Board of Trustees had voted. And we came to campus and met the community. And for me, it has only been a beautiful thing ever since. And I arrived on campus in July of 2018, was formally began uh, September, but I didn't wait to begin in September. I just went ahead and got started, and um, was installed in, I don't even remember when that was now. I think it was April of 2019, but it's just been a beautiful journey. This is a wonderful community of women and men who are seeking to prepare next generations of ministry leadership across the breadth and scope of our land. Um, I'm just thankful to God, Annie, for the opportunity to serve in this institution, as the good book says, for such a time as this.
That's right. Amen. Well, thank you. Thanks for letting us know a little bit about your own background and what brought you to Louisville. Interestingly, I think you started, it sounds like you started at the seminary about the same time I started at First Pres.
Oh, okay.
Sounds
Okay.
like it's been a good journey for both of us.
Yes.
So
And I
that's
should have
great.
mentioned that I came here from Washington, D.C. Um,
Yeah.
I was at Howard University School of Divinity, and the call came to Louisville, and here we are.
Good, good. And we were talking a little bit about that before everybody hopped on. So um, tell us a little bit about who is a Louisville student these days. Is there an average age or a background or even a denomination? We may have some folks on here tonight that may be surprised to learn that not all students are Presbyterian. So if you, maybe not the majority. So if you could
Yes.
share with us a little bit about, what does a Louisville seminary, who are they these days?
Well, I thank you, Annie. I would say that the Louisville Seminary student that I have been meeting is um, so deeply representative of the Constitution of the United States of America. And by Constitution, I don't mean the document. I mean the composition, the demographic of who and what we are. About 50% of our students, more or less, are Presbyterian, PCUSA. Um, but the rest are from a number of Protestant traditions. Um, we have a growing number of non-denominational students. That's the real growth industry, and we have your uh, assortment of Methodists and Baptists and Episcopalians and Unitarians and on and on. And then there are always persons who are seeking. They are in search. And it's not that they are in search of meaning so much as they are hungering and thirsting to know more about the living God. And so they come to a place like this because they want to explore the depths of what it means to be in relationship. Um, in theological education, we call it faith seeking understanding. And so we have students who will also come under that aegis. Our student population, I think the median age is in the uh, early 30s. Um, there are a good number of students who come straight from college. Um, the trajectory in recent years has been that seminary students tend to trend a bit older, but the last few years we are seeing a trend younger. Um, and I think in part I think it has to do with issues of economy, people seeking to um, figure out how they can uh, have a livable life. And at the same time, I think it also has to do with the turbulence of our world. And people are looking for stability and anchor, um, that which is going to hold steadfast for them. And so, um, theological education, not alone, but many of the helping professions as a whole, I think find themselves in this same space. There are in among the older students, um, 40s, 50s, 60s, um, there are always those persons who have made a change in vocation. And by vocation, we refer to the Latin word of vocare, which simply means the call, which simply means that there is a sense that the divine has placed the imprimatur upon one's life. And now you want to seek earnestly to understand what that means. That perhaps for a good portion of your life, you've lived um, in such a way that you've had a good income, you've perhaps raised a family, you've gone through some of the stages of life, the ups and downs, the turbulence therein, and have come to that place where you need to be able to abide. You need to be able to dwell for a while, to come and sit and know of God. And so there are students who will come. They will be bivocational, some of them, but others are changing direction entirely. They have felt the call. They don't know what it means yet, but they know that God is calling. And they come from all over the country. And they, about a third of our students are um, persons of color. The vast majority of those are African American. Um, and we have several international students in the student body. It's it is a good time to be in ministry preparation because the world really has need of what the ministry has to offer.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I have heard of late that there will soon be a clergy shortage in the church. And for a long time, I thought, well, how could that be? Because we're a shrinking denomination. And I certainly have witnessed in my old presbytery a number of church closures, and Giddings Lovejoy. We went from 104 churches when I moved there to 79 in a matter of 18 years. And so I always thought, well, how could there be a shortage when we seem to be closing churches? And yet I'm starting to kind of understand that more. So, students that are there to prepare for ministry, what do you find that they want to do these days? Do they want to go into the church, or are they looking for something else?
Annie, boy, that's a big question. Let me I guess start by saying that um, they want to serve. They want to know that they are going to a place where they will matter as human beings, that their personhood will be counted as significant, because this is how they are going to treat the congregations with whom they interact. It is so terribly important that um, our churches know that the people who are coming to them, coming to um, every congregation, irrespective of denomination or tradition, they are not coming as office holders. They are coming as people who have names and lives and trajectories that are sometimes for good and sometimes not so. And when we reach out and embrace in this way, we are going to find persons who are willing to come our way. They are also looking for what unfortunately is becoming all too common now, congregations who are actually able to pay a living wage. Many of our churches have become so small that this is a very difficult thing for them to do. Obviously, there are still very significant congregations, but many of our churches are not able to meet that need. And so um, persons have to become tent makers. And if you have families and the like, it becomes very difficult. And of course, by tent makers, I'm meaning that they have to have another uh, form of income in order to make ends meet. I would also say, um, Annie, and I think this is very important. I do not buy the idea that there is a shortage of clergy.
Okay.
What there is a shortage of courage, a shortage of courage on the part of churches to accept ministers who do not fit their profile, who do not fit their comfort zone, who do not fit their demographic. It reminds me of, you may remember not so long ago, there was a considerable discussion in our country about adoption.
Mhm.
And, and white America especially was wringing its hands, saying there are no children to adopt. There were children all over the place. The
Mhm.
problem was they weren't the right children. I hope you hear what I'm saying.
I do hear what you're saying. I think that
Yes.
is a fair statement to make as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think that this is our congregations have to wrestle with this. I'm not much of a football fan, but in the NFL, they have this little thing called the Rooney Rule,
Mhm.
which is, and if any of you are familiar with this, you know that for more than a decade now, the NFL has put all of these guidelines and recommendations in place to try and hire more coaches, heads of football teams, general managers, um, to hire more of them to head up their operations. This year, there were, I think, 8 teams in need of coaches at the end of the season. Teams let go of their coaches who they felt were not successful.
Mhm.
Out of the 8 hires, there were 0 who were African American. There was one who was, for the first time, a Muslim American hired as a head coach, um, and all the rest were Caucasian. All of which is to say that what we see going on in our churches is no different than what we see going on in any other sector of our society. We're just seeing women becoming um, officials in the NFL, in the NBA, sitting on the sideline as managers and coaches in professional male dominated sports, and on and on. So whether we're talking gender or race or ethnicity, or a number of other factors, we are still a society that wrestles greatly with what it means to embrace the sound of the genuine in other persons. We are still all too often, I think, given to surface experiencing of other people, wanting to stay in the comfort zone where on the shallow end of life, our own existence will not be too deeply disturbed.
Right.
But the God of the deep, out of the depths have I cried unto thee, says the good book. The God of the deep expects more of us, we who call ourselves followers of the way.
Yeah.
And this is what gives me great hope, and Annie, for the church, that we still have the opportunity to be leaders and not followers of national uh, demographic, vocational trends, that we can establish a prophetic sensibility that says that we are going to break all the rules and we are going to accept human beings just as they are, where they are, and they will fill our pulpits, and they will be women, and they will be men, and they will be black, and they will be brown, and they will be white, and they will be gay, and they will be straight, and they will be bisexual, and they will be young, and they will be old, and God will love them all. I
Yeah.
am just so absolutely committed to that.
Well, and amen. And I appreciate you saying that because, of course, as a woman, I mean, we certainly have, had our fair share of struggles as well along the way in terms of, positions that, we may apply for and, not even be considered for,
Yes.
because of our gender. And, that still, very much happens today.
Mm.
Not as much as it did maybe when I started out 25 years ago, but it is definitely alive and well. And I can think of when I was examined for ministry, which is a process we all have to go through. And, we're asked all of these questions in front of the presbytery. And I had gone after a man that was, 28 and married and 2 kids and, going to be an associate pastor and, what everybody expects. And then there was me and I'm single and, 24 and going into a non-ministry job, and boy, did I get grilled compared to him. So yeah, I can definitely attest to that.
And what we have also seen, according to all of the studies, all the research, very clearly, that when women are called to churches, they are inevitably called to the small churches,
That
the
is,
ones that are least able to provide sustainable living. And of course, it doesn't mean that one cannot gradually move up into larger congregations, but from the starting point, it means that you are already at a disadvantage relative to um, being able to care for family and therefore community. And these things do really count a
oh,
lot.
absolutely. In my former presbytery, I think at one point we looked at, what women were paid compared to men. And there were 3 of us, I think, that were paid over the median, myself and 2 other women. And other than that, they were all paid under the median.
Mhm.
And I mean, yeah, so can be like any profession in that regard. So I've been fortunate to serve churches that have supported women, but I guess if they didn't, they wouldn't call me.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's that too. Tell us a little bit, and I just want to let people know that we will take questions at the end. I see some of them popping up in the chat box, so go ahead and leave them, but we'll address those questions at the end. Tell us a little bit about the Black Church Studies program. This is a new thing, obviously, since I've left, and I would love to hear more about that.
So I do not know the precise year that the Black Church Studies program started, but I think it was about 15 years ago, Annie.
Okay.
Maybe slightly less than that, but um, the reason why I'm thinking it's about 15 years is it was, if I remember correctly, it was at the time that I was getting ready to leave Emory University. I was at Candler School of Theology at that time, and I was the director of Black Church Studies there.
Okay.
I also chaired one of the PhD programs, the American Religious Cultures program in religion. So I was doing 2 different things there. But I remember at the time, the person who was on the faculty at Louisville Seminary reaching out to me by email, asking how we had established our program, and I kind of walked with that individual through the formation of developing a Black Church Studies program. I don't know if anyone at LPTS knows that, but
They do now.
yes, I'm thinking that was around 2006 or
Okay.
somewhere thereabouts, 2005. And the program is extremely important, considering for those of you who do not know the history of LPTS, it is a proud one in that there are 10 PCUSA seminaries in the country. At least traditionally that has been the case. Of the 10, only one historically can say that it embraced students who were both from the northern and southern sections of the United States. And we're talking about, of course, the late 19th, early and mid 20th centuries. The Louisville Seminary was a combination of 2 institutions coming together, one from Danville, Kentucky, which is about an hour and a half away, and the other here in Louisville, and they joined as one in the 1890s and became what we are today. Now, why do I mention this? Because Louisville Seminary's ethos has been one of constantly seeking ways to create rapprochement, to facilitate commonalities in places where there have only been divides. The history with respect to Northern and Southern students coming here, however, only applied to men, and it only applied to white men. So when you read the history of our institution, you don't see anything that speaks to that. There's a glaring silence about that, but we need to speak the whole truth about who we are, because this is what has enabled LPTS to grow, I believe, in the way it has, to the stature that it has. Um, as a result, we now see a kind of generative spirit here that wants to continue that outreach. And Black Church Studies in the early 2000s was one of those pieces, because there was a great recognition. How can you have a seminary in the South in an urban context that does not speak to Black people? Because LPTS had not done a very significant job in decades prior. There was the occasional person of African descent, but not many. And we could say this about a number of other facets of our institution, but Black Church Studies was established to, one, give Black students a sense of place, to provide them with a sense of opportunity, and it was to educate every student without respect of race or ethnicity or any other social qualification. It was to educate everyone that if we are going to establish e pluribus unum, we the people, in democratic terms, or if we are going to establish the commonwealth of God, beloved community, in theological terms, then we had better get to work, because the rainbow children of God were not going to be denied. And so the rainbow has continued to come to LPTS, and Black Church Studies has been a significant part of that development. And I'm very proud not only to be here, because I think in many respects, my own presence here embodies the institution's dedication to wanting to expand beyond the reach of what it had previously known. It wanted to courageously go, if I may borrow a Star Trek term, where no one had gone before. And to do it in the South is particularly poignant. Um, I think it is needed in our region of the country in ways that are perhaps unparalleled elsewhere. Although I would say that when it comes to the United States of America and race, to quote El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, anyone who lives south of the Canadian border, if you're Black, there's no difference. And I won't say exactly what he said, but I think you get the drift. The United States has long had that problem, and we know that one of the things that is said about our country is that original sin called racism, and specifically anti-Black racism, has been generative in so many ways of causing derision and degradations of peoples across a hierarchy of manifestations that has just been truly, I think, debilitating to the unifying impulse of our society.
Yeah, well, amen. And that's a good segue, Alton, into, talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how, Louisville Seminary has been involved in that movement. And of course, here you are in Louisville, where, Breonna Taylor was killed. And having come from St. Louis when, Michael Brown was killed and the Ferguson, happened, I understand how that, even though in so many ways I was so removed from Ferguson, there still was this feeling in the city that something was not right, that everybody had known was not right. But that we now were having to really face that something was not right. And especially as I just remember that, when the grand jury verdict was coming down, it was like, all of St. Louis was just this powder keg, kind of ready to explode at any minute. And churches could not look the other way and ignore this and pretend that this was not happening in our own city, even though it would, maybe we could say, it's not going to affect us, like where my church was.
Mhm.
So I'm interested in knowing, like, what's going on with on the campus these days. How is the seminary responding to all of this? And then we can talk about kind of what you think a church's role is, a church like First Pres, for example.
Well, the and before I respond, let me also just say, because I should have said this when I was talking about Black Church Studies. This is a PSA. If any of you are interested, February 19th through the 21st, we have our annual Black Church Studies consultation, and you can go online on any of our social media outlets and you can see the registration. It will be by Zoom this year, and this ties in differently, Annie, to this conversation, because not only do we have a racial divide in urban and suburban spaces,
Mhm.
we also have one in rural contexts. And rural peoples, Black, brown, and white, constantly find themselves disregarded by those of us who consider ourselves more important because we live in dense populations. And so I just want to note that that's why we've really been giving, in a state like Kentucky, where there are so many people living in rural contexts
Mhm.
who are oftentimes having difficulty make ends meet. And even when they are, still not receiving the respect of the rest of their uh, fellows in their communities. It's something that we take very seriously. So just want to note that, because it's another one of those social divides that continues to ravage us. But when it comes to um, uh, Louisville and the seminary, if you walk on our campus uh, today, you will see Black Lives Matter signs all over the place. Um, they periodically disappear, but we keep putting them out. and uh,
Good.
and um, for those of you who do not know Louisville Seminary, or if you've never visited it, and it can tell you it is a bucolic environment. We have a park-like setting. It is an exquisite environment. When you come here, you feel like you could take out a 9 iron and go ahead and hit some golf shots. It's that kind of a place, and it's um, and the folk here will tell you that it made me somewhat uncomfortable when I first arrived, because ministry for me is not a leisure uh, experience. It is one that is rough and tumble and requires you to get your hands dirty and to, be out there in the midst of the folk, wherever their lives happen to take them. And then here I am coming onto this very comfortable, uh, place, and settling in and realizing not only do we have a beautiful seminary campus, we also have a campus that is geographically removed from much of the hurt and pain that has been a part of the experience of the city of Louisville. So, pretty much all of America, you have your divides. In St. Louis, you have Delmar,
Oh, yeah.
which is the dividing line, right, in terms of how
Oh,
people
yeah.
think of black and white, rich and poor. The Delmar divide has been there for decades. And when I was for the year before I came to um, LPTS, I was a visiting scholar at Eden Seminary while I was taking a year of sabbatical after serving for a decade as dean at Howard. And um, I spent a lot of time um, involved in the streets, learning about the protest movement. Um, and It was sobering. I ended up teaching a class about the Great Divide of St. Louis. And then to come to Louisville and to realize that the divide here, which is called Ninth Street, was scarcely different. And we could just go down the line of cities and talk about the very visible divides, which also have a profound impact on our psychological topography, how we navigate the cities and the spaces where we live, um, where we will often unconsciously navigate to places again where people are familiar and comfortable to us, and studiously avoid to the place that we are not even consciously aware of, those places where people who um, are not our comfort level are to be found. It's a socioeconomic issue. The United States, you may have seen Isabel Wilkerson's latest book called Caste. If you're not familiar with it, came out this past year. I highly recommend it. She also wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, but this book, Caste, is a powerful exposition of how the United States is not only shaped by race, and it's not only shaped by class, but it is shaped by caste, which is an even more enduring form of social division because it takes into account issues of prestige and status and education and recognition. It ensures that people will be permanently ensconced in whatever their social situation is. And she takes a look at the United States track record, apartheid South Africa's track record. Um, she looks at Nazi Germany, which actually learned most of its moves from, guess where? The United States of America. Most of us have no clue about that. We just shake our heads when it comes to Kristallnacht and all of these things. Most of us have no idea that the hatred that we have perpetrated, that has so consumed our nation, that has become a part of our civic hostilities, was for Germany in the 30s and 40s, especially. We were a godsend. And that's a tragic indictment of who we were at the time and who we long to be. And then she looks at caste in the context of India, because the Indian caste system is the globe's longest running permanent caste system, as we know. And so all of that to say that here in Louisville, we have divisions that are seemingly permanent when it comes to matters of race. And I have been involved with particularly folk in the business, commerce segments of our city, engaged in conversations with them about what can transpire to change things. Um, but it is exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, Annie, to change things if you simply expect Black folk and brown folk from the part of the city where they live to come to you, as opposed to changing the infrastructures that support human life where Black and brown people live. We are hearing, for example, about the severely disproportionate vaccinations of white America versus Black and brown. It doesn't take much to figure out that if you don't have medical clinics in your community, if there are no hospital facilities nearby, if a tent has to be set up where you live because there's nothing immediately available, if you have to get on 2 or 3 buses to get to where the vaccines are, if all of the vaccination processes are online and you have to go to a library to use a computer to see the process, if you only have at your disposal a smartphone and you don't have 20/20 vision, trying to navigate that thing, to try and make an appointment is terribly complex. And the older we get, our generations who are in their 60s and above in particular are really wrestling with how difficult it is to navigate the terrain. Breonna Taylor was an uprising because the city of Louisville tried to pretend it didn't happen. She was killed by the police in the middle of the night in March of last year. It only surfaced in the public arena near the end of May with the killing of George Floyd. And the eruption of what took place in Minneapolis. I'm from St. Paul. So I know all about the divides up there too. The killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery in Southeast Georgia, just an hour, 45 minutes away from where my wife grew up. All of these were a combustible mix waiting to happen. And Breonna, because she was not only Black, but she was also a young woman whose entire life was before her. She was making strides, as we like to say. She was about to be a difference maker, working with EMT and the like. And the police summarily took her life away. No one has been held accountable. Right. We have an attorney general in our state who has done everything at his disposal to ensure that the armed presence that vexes Black lives, that has been around since the mid to late 19th century in the form of armed vigilantes that would become the Ku Klux Klan, the citizens' councils, and take a variety of other forms, would crystallize in the form that we now call the police, who we are told are called to protect and to serve. Well, we know that protect and serve has had a very selective set of interests, and those interests have neither been Black nor brown. Mm-hmm. And this is the reality of what happened with Breonna Taylor. Black folk in Ferguson with Michael Brown, Black folk here with Breonna Taylor. I think back, and this is a story that I tell often now. My own parents leaving Mississippi in the early fall of 1955. They lived in the Delta, just minutes, perhaps an hour away from Emmett Till, where he was lynched. A lot of Black folk, young Black folk especially, got up and left the state that day. Mississippi wasn't a piece of cake then. It's not a piece of cake today. But this has been going on for as long as the United States of America has been going on. Our nation was born in violence. Mm-hmm. We were born of violence. Whether we're talking about the forcible usurpation of land, or whether we are talking about the forced removal of peoples from their homelands and transported across the Atlantic to worlds they did not want to know. It doesn't matter where you want to start. This is the history that we do not know, that we do not share, because it is not a triumphal history of a wonderful and proud nation. And what it means is that it redounds to us that then in the moment when an officer's bullet will take away a beautiful Black life, that we will suddenly have a moment of reckoning. And I would suggest that a major reason why Breonna Taylor was such a clarion call, that George Floyd was the same, was because they both took place in the context of COVID-19.
Mhm.
The United States of America had no choice but to be still and know that racism is here.
Right,
We couldn't go about our daily tasks.
right,
We couldn't go to work. We couldn't go to school. We couldn't go to play. We were held captive by the moment, and we had to have a collective moment where we were called to account. And Louisville Seminary was not immune to that. Our students, many of them, took to the streets. We had at least one of our board members at marches because I saw him there. I was at a number of protests myself. A number of our faculty were involved,
sure.
but it was mainly our students. It's always the young people, especially in every generation, who take up the mantle because they know that their futures absolutely depend on the courage of their convictions today. And
Right.
as we get older, some of us get a little maudlin, we get a little pedestrian, we get a little satiated, we get a little comfortable, we forget that the world is not as it ought to be, but we want to safeguard and protect what we have. And in the process of doing so, we cut off our siblings, we separate ourselves from our sisters and our brothers, and the opportunity to see each other as profoundly and beautifully, wonderfully human as we are is
Mhm.
lost. And what I'm hoping, Annie, we are doing at LPTS is not only preparing women and men for ministry in the 21st century, but that we are inviting them to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly, to take their ministries not to the comfortable places, but to the places where the comfortable will be afflicted. And we can only do that if we are also willing to be afflicted ourselves. And this is one of the beautiful things that I have found about LPTS. We keep stretching ourselves, we keep pressing ourselves. And right now we have committed as an institution to being an anti-racist institution. Last year we went up for accreditation, and our regional body told us that we were the first and only college or university in the Southeast where SACS does its accreditation work. We were the first and only to ever make this our declaration of intent. So in our hiring practices, in our faculty searches, in our student recruitment efforts, in our outreach, we have to have integrity within and without, in our board composition
Hmm.
and in our leadership. It is terribly important that we model what we teach,
Right.
practice what we preach.
Wow. Well, I am proud to be a Louisville grad hearing you, Alton. I mean, wow, it sounds like the seminary is doing great work. And, you know, I mean, I only speak for myself, but it's so important, I think, given, you know, the age that we're living in, and everything we're facing, we have to be workers of justice, and not be afraid to speak out about that. You know, I mean, I read the Bible and I look at what Jesus did, and I just say that that's what he was about. How can we not be about this? Like, this should not be up for debate, in my in my opinion. to be workers of justice. Absolutely, absolutely. I want to make sure that we allow some time for other people's questions. And I am going to take a look here at the chat box. And if you have any questions, go ahead and please leave them in the chat box for us. So we have somebody here from the Detroit Calvary Presbyterian Church. We were talking about Detroit before you all hopped online. We have a 1997 grad. So that would have just been a year after me. Somebody asked, and I'm not quite sure what they mean. This was really early on, but something about, do you feel that this is a war on humanity? I think that's when you were talking about churches having the courage to call people. Somebody said they're already in love with you. Somebody noted that their second oldest sister is an ordained Presbyterian, graduated from Union in Virginia, went to a church in Piedmont, North Carolina.
Oh,
Okay.
where?
It just says Piedmont of North
Piedmont.
Carolina.
Okay, because we lived in the Piedmont.
Okay.
This is Mary Margaret. It was my sister June, and she went to a church in Albertson, North Carolina. My future brother-in-law was in Hallsville.
Oh,
It's
okay.
kind of in the center, and they ended up going to Lillington.
Okay, all right.
And
Well, that's beautiful. Every part of this country just has a magnificent mosaic of human expression and experiencing. And I love to have the opportunity to move around and to meet and greet us wherever we are, and to know that there's goodness everywhere, even in the midst of the madness that I think is so often the United States of America. The question about, are we at war? I wasn't quite sure where that was going, Annie, in terms of war. Of what does that mean?
War, something about war on humanity, and I'm not quite sure where they were going with that either. I'm going to go back to you.
I would need a little bit more.
There is a war on humanity.
Because I do think that we have always lived with hierarchy. There have always been a hierarchy of oppressions. And the irony is, for those who are undergoing the oppressions, they all feel pretty much the same. But for those who would be the perpetrator of hierarchy, there tends to be a rank order of who matters the most. And in our day and time, it is, I think, typically based on how well those individuals or those groups can be commodified. To what degree do they satisfy our political economy? And to that degree, persons matter. But if they cannot be objectified in that manner, then they become altogether obsolete, and we relegate them to the scraps heap of society.
Yeah. Let's see, Tony, were there any questions on Facebook for us? I'll let him check that out.
No questions, just a lot of hearts and thumbs up.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Alton before it's 7:30? Somebody left a registration for the Black Church Studies consultation. So that's great. Yeah, we may.
And if any of you ever want to come down and visit Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, the greatest seminary in the city of Louisville.
That's right.
I would like to make a statement.
Yes, I don't know who that is, but
this is Camille Williams Neal, and I'm the first Black woman to graduate from Louisville Seminary. And I wanted to say that my experience at Louisville Seminary was very difficult. And I think that we haven't really touched a lot on sexism, but I think that that also came into bear. I graduated in 1980, from the seminary, 81. And I was ordained in 81. However, there were so many hoops that I had to jump through that I was constantly bombarded from people that gave me a fellowship to be there from the Rockefeller Fund to change seminaries and to go to another seminary. But I decided to stick it out. There and also in, I guess it was like about 2006, 7, or 8, I remember going to the beginning of the Black Studies department at the seminary and saying, as a graduate, I would like to offer any help that I might be able to give. And I was rebuffed. And I don't know whether it was because I was a woman or because I had gone the route of being a missionary or chaplain or whatever. But I think that there are a lot of people that are graduates that would love to be a part. Some of us have gotten older so that we don't have as much energy as we used to, but still we're available. So I chose to go to McCormick for my DMin. So I would get a view of what it would be like to have a different seminary under my belt.
Sister Camille, it's good to see you. There's so many people on here. I wasn't able to see who everybody was on the.
I had trouble getting on. I registered and everything, and I could not get on for about 40 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what that was all about. But there are a lot of people on this tonight. I want to be respectful of our time. I know that we could all talk all night. I didn't even get to all of my questions, but I do want to be respectful. So are there any other questions?
Alton, I have more of a comment than anything else. I grew up in Memphis and I am back in Memphis, and this is where I was ordained. I lived in Louisville for about 7 years. This is kind of a long comment. Back when I was little, I may not even been born yet, but Dr. Huff was the minister at the time in the late 50s. And the session made the decision that if an African-American family came to First Presbyterian in Memphis, where I grew up and where I attend, that they would either direct them to Parkway Gardens or provide camp fare there or to another African-American church, because they did not want that Black family to come in. My father wrote a letter both to Dr. Huff and to the session. He was on the board of deacons at that time. Most all, if not all, Presbyterian churches had a board of deacons at that point. And he said, if I'm on the door, I will invite them in and they will sit with my family. Okay, go from that to First Presbyterian hanging a Black Lives Matter banner on the bell tower, directly across from the judicial system. It's the Center for Criminal Justice Center. It's the jail. Back in the 2000s, I was back in Memphis, and there was an LPTS event here in Memphis. It was at the University Club. Of course, I'm thinking, whoa, that's a big ritzy place. And when I walked in, it bothered me. And what bothered me was every guest of LPTS was white. Even though we had Black professors, Kylan was the dean of students, none of them were there. And all the serving staff were Black. That made me so blasted uncomfortable, because here in Louisville was, we already had the Black Church Studies program. We were already an approved seminary for not only for Methodist studies, but for AME, CME, AME Zion. We had Deborah Munford, and I don't remember if Dale Andrews was still there. Here we were, we had done all sorts of good things for race relationships. And we go to a blasted country club. And we know the history of country clubs and people of color. I wrote to Michael Jenkins about that, saying, this is not who we are.
Mm.
I was, to put it bluntly, I was pissed off.
Now it says Mary Margaret. Is that how you go by?
That's what I go by, yes.
So I will say this, and then I'll be done. The last time I checked, the eradication of racism is not a linear equation. We go by fits and starts. We make our progress and find ourselves slipping back. And it is a part of the human equation, no matter what the ism may be. Racism happens, of course, to obviously be extraordinarily pernicious in our society, but we could just as easily apply, the same kinds of understandings to LGBTQIA or to sexism or to a whole host of things. The United States, I think, because of this original sin, has also a particular redemption that it must address. And we are nowhere near that. But I will say this, I would not be at LPTS if it was not for the fact that we had a board of trustees that I did not see reflecting the demographics of the seminary. But their hearts were ready to go there. And that's where I receive my reassurance that the God of our salvation continues to work with the hearts and minds of we messed up people and tries to take us forward. And I am deeply encouraged by that. We have a long way to go at LPTS with all of the anti-racism work we do here. So you're a graduate? Are you?
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay,
sir, I
so
am.
you know about the portraits of our presidents and all of that?
Oh, yes.
And
when the year Polly and I were in the same class, Polly Williams and I graduated together.
Okay.
That was when we were looking for our first African-American professor. I don't remember who it was, but up until that point, we did not have any African-American faces except for
Virgil Cruz.
I'm sorry, you're right, Polly, but he was gone by the time we got there, so I didn't see his face very much.
Yeah.
But other than Virgil,
yeah,
all of our Black faces were maintenance and in the kitchen and housekeeping and that kind of thing.
Pearl, we had a colleague and a classmate, Pearl Gillespie, and she had a really tough time. I really celebrate Francis. Francis, I'm a Lombard nomination.
I go by Camille, but Francis is my first name.
Oh,
so
hi,
I'm gonna.
Camille. It's nice to meet you. Hello. My name's Polly. I go by Polly.
And
So, I'm gonna wrap us up. We got a lot of preachers on this call. I did not factor that into my time. I should have factored that in. But I want to be really respectful of everybody's time, and it's already 7:40. Well, I'll let y'all connect somehow through Facebook or whatever. And I think we have email addresses. So if y'all need to connect, let us know. We can figure that out.
And someone has asked about connecting with me. My email address for anyone who'd like to reach out, A, B as in boy, P as in Paul, I'm sorry, getting them all mixed up, A Pollard at lpts.edu. A Pollard. Hey, Jessica, I see you typing. Thank you.
There you go. So there it is, A Pollard at lpts.edu. And of course, the link to the Black Church Studies. And we can also put that on the church's Facebook page. So Tony, let's go ahead and put that up there and make that happen.
And may I say one last thing before we go, Annie?
Sure.
I just want everyone to see the picture behind me on the wall, which is my mantra, whosoever, from John 3:16, the picture of the Nazarene with his arms outstretched.
Yes.
Where no one is found beyond the pale of the living God. We are
Amen.
all siblings one to another. This is God's dream for us, that we will embrace each other the same.
Amen. And that is a wonderful note for all of us to leave on. Alton, it has been a great pleasure to have you here tonight. I know we could have gone on a lot longer. We'll have you for round 2 some other time.
All right.
Yeah, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And we'll make sure to put those links, First Presbyterian Church Fort Wayne Facebook page. Just if you aren't friends with it, just, I don't know, put it in there and search for it and Google it and all the rest of the great stuff, and you can find that link. But it's been great having you, and everybody would go with blessings to love and serve the Lord and be about the work of justice. Yes, amen. So thank you all. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Annie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.